Okay, so have you ever noticed how you automatically start using your hands when you're trying to explain something tricky?
Oh, definitely.
Or maybe you lean in, adopt a different posture when you're really concentrating hard.
Yeah, yeah.
What if those movements, those physical things, weren't just like helpful little extras? What if they were actually part of the knowledge itself?
It's a pretty mind-bending idea at first, isn't it?
It really is.
We tend to think of knowing something as, purely mental, all up in the brain.
Exactly. Okay, so let's really dig into this. This deep dive is based on some fascinating excerpts from a piece called The Motor Dynamics of Learning Expression by Shiva Narayan Takshila Page.
Right.
And it presents this view of learning that really challenges that whole mind-body separation thing.
Yeah, the source material looks really closely at how postures, gestures, just the way we physically hold ourselves and move might be totally fundamental to how we learn, how we understand things.
Hmm.
It pulls in research from neuroscience, motor science, even educational psychology to build its case. It's quite comprehensive.
So our mission today, then, is to explore this theory, the idea that your body isn't just a passive vehicle carrying your brain around.
Right, not just a meat suit.
Exactly.
Hmm.
But it's an active, maybe even essential player in learning, knowing, and crucially, expressing what you know.
And what that could mean for, well, everything from communication to how we actually teach.
Yeah. Get ready for maybe a few aha moments along the way, or maybe uh-oh moments for traditional views.
Could be. So the core idea, and it is pretty surprising when you first grapple with it, is that postures and gestures aren't just, well, they're not just side effects of thinking or just things we tack onto words to help explain. This research argues they're essential parts of the knowledge itself.
Essential parts. Wow.
They're described as active physical ways that internalized knowledge shows itself, manifestations, you could say.
So it's not just my body helps me explain. It's that my body, in its movement, is part of the explanation, part of the knowing.
That's the assertion. It's a really strong claim.
Okay, so how does that work? What's the science behind it, according to this source? How does an abstract idea, turn into a physical thing you do?
Well, the source argues it's not random at all. It's actually deeply encoded in the brain's motor circuits.
Ah, okay, like movement control centers.
Exactly. Areas like the cerebellum, the basal ganglia, the motor cortex.
Hmm.
These places aren't just for, picking up a cup or walking.
Right.
They're highlighted here as the regions that actively shape what the source calls the motor dynamics of learning expression.
Motor dynamics of learning expression.
Catchy.
It is. And these brain regions are presented as the machinery that translates concepts into physical forms you can actually express.
And this connects to a concept the source introduces called learnography, doesn't it?
That's right, learnography.
Yeah.
It's presented as this emerging theory where learning isn't just cognitive, not just in your head.
It's fundamentally motor-driven, too. So in this view, the body effectively becomes an expressive organ for the brain, learning and expressing through movement.
Like your body is learning a dance or a script at the same time your mind learns the facts.
That's a great way to put it. And this theory talks about something called brainpage modules.
Brain page modules. Okay, what are those?
The idea here is when you learn something, the result isn't just stored as abstract data somewhere in your cortex.
Uh-huh.
It's also encoded physically through motor experiences, through actions. These brainpage modules are what activate the specific motor sequences, the postures, the gestures that let you express that knowledge.
So it's less like saving a file and more like saving a little action program.
Kind of, yeah. A program for your body to run when that knowledge is accessed.
Okay, that actually makes a lot of intuitive sense when you watch someone who's really passionate and knowledgeable explaining something.
Right, they don't just stand still and talk.
No, their whole body gets into it. And the source apparently gets quite specific about this, talking about how different body parts almost speak.
Yes, it does. It describes how lips, fingers, eyes, they all play a role in conveying the information. Your face shows the emotional layer, obviously.
Uh-huh.
But it even mentions things like how tension in your neck muscles might somehow relate to describing abstract ideas during a presentation.
Wow. I can sort of picture that, like watching a professor really getting into it, using their hands to almost sculpt the ideas in the air.
Creating that invisible structure.
Yeah, you can almost see it.
And the source actually has a name for that phenomenon. It calls it the dynamic and live blackboard effect, or DALB.
DLB, okay.
It's presented as the science behind these gestures and postures being a form of motor knowledge.
The live blackboard made of movement.
Exactly. And what's really interesting is that this DALB is apparently developed through the unconscious workings of the brainstem and cerebellum.
Unconscious?
Yeah. The source calls this an example of dark knowledge.
Dark knowledge. That sounds intriguing. Is that like knowledge you use without consciously thinking about it, like riding a bike?
Precisely. You know how to do it, your body knows, but you can't necessarily list out every single muscle adjustment consciously.
Right.
It's knowledge that runs deep below conscious awareness in those fundamental brain areas, but it comes out as these really expressive, meaningful movements that show you understand something.
So this isn't just some quirky habit then. It's wired into our basic brain structure.
Yeah.
The source mentions the cerebellar basal ganglia circuitry specifically. What's its role here?
That circuitry is described as absolutely crucial. It's supposedly what translates the topics, the actual content you're learning or teaching, into those motor dynamics we were talking about.
The DLB stuff.
Right. It's coordinating the thought with the action needed to express it, making it smooth, integrated.
And the source makes a really big claim based on this circuitry, doesn't it? Something about a law of singularity.
Yes, that's a very bold statement within this framework. The idea is that all knowledge transfer, especially in places like schools, ultimately gets converted into this motor knowledge of what it calls cerebellar learnography.
All of it.
That's the claim. Whatever information comes in, the theory suggests it gets processed and eventually encoded into a physical, motor-based format that your system can express.
Wow. And the cerebellum itself seems to be doing a lot of the work here.
Definitely. The source points to its role in coordinating thoughts and movements, obviously, but also procedural memory learning skills, like we said.
And that finger mapping thing we talked about.
Yes, that too. And it even suggests the cerebellum helps improve learning efficiency, potentially shortening the time it takes to grasp something.
Making learning faster through movement.
Seems to be the implication. It positions the cerebellum as really central to this whole embodied knowledge idea.
Okay, but what about feelings? If learning is so physical, how does emotion fit in? The source mentions the amygdala, the limbic system, and something called the zeitstream.
Right. The limbic system is our emotional hub, essentially, and the source connects this emotional processing directly to our postures, gestures, facial expressions.
Makes sense.
The theory suggests that emotional knowledge, which develops in the amygdala, can actually act as a kind of learning force.
A learning force.
How? It seems to imply that our emotional state or connection to the material can drive cognitive learning and help shape those brainpage modules we talked about. Your feelings influence how your body encodes the learning.
So how I feel about calculus might affect how I physically, gesture when trying to explain a derivative.
Potentially, yes. It suggests your emotional engagement isn't separate from the physical expression of understanding, or lack thereof.
And can you manage that? The course mentioned rationalizing the amygdala system.
Yeah, it proposes that by consciously using and practicing this brain page theory, actively engaging your motor expression as part of learning, you might be able to integrate that emotional component more effectively.
Interesting. So it's not just the brain and emotions. The actual physical hardware matters too.
Yeah.
You mentioned the brachial plexus.
Absolutely. The source specifically brings up the brachial plexus in our upper limbs, that incredibly complex network of nerves running from the neck down into the arm.
Right, controlling arm and hand movements.
Exactly. It originates from spinal nerve C5 down to T1, and it's what allows for the amazingly precise and dexterous movements of our hands and fingers.
Which are crucial for gestures.
Crucial. The source uses the example of early humans discovering and using stone tools. The evolution of this complex nerve network is what allowed our hands to become these sophisticated instruments for both feeling the world's sensory input and manipulating it motor output.
Needing that fine muscle control.
Precisely. And the source links this evolutionary development directly to our capacity for this kind of learnography, this embodied knowledge transfer. Our physical evolution basically set the stage.
It really connects the dots from evolution to brain structure to how we learn today.
It tries to build that whole picture, yeah.
Okay, so if we pull these threads together, the brain circuits, learnography, brain page modules, emotion, the physical body stuff like the brachial plexus, the source outlines some key takeaways about this motor knowledge link, right?
Yes, it summarizes several core findings. We've touched on most, but maybe we can recap and add a couple.
Good idea.
So first, the big one. Motor activities aren't just doing, they actively encode knowledge physically via these motor pathways.
And brainpage modules are the engine driving this expressive learning through postures and gestures.
Right, and then there's the idea that purposeful gestures like intentionally using your hands while explaining can actually help manage your cognitive load.
Make thinking easier.
Yeah, potentially free up mental resources. It might also improve memory recall, and the source even links it to the brain's natural processing rhythms, mentioning something called a thalamic cyclizide rehearsal. A bit technical, but suggests it fits how the brain works.
So gestures aren't just decoration, they can literally boost your brain power in the moment.
That seems to be the implication. Then there's that cerebellar basal ganglia loop again, integrating thought and action smoothly so you can physically embody abstract concepts.
And posture, reflecting your state confident posture, potentially linking to better thinking, slumping, maybe meaning you're overloaded.
Exactly. Also, the mirror neuron system gets a mention. You know how we learn by watching others? It likely plays a role here too, helping us imitate and internalize knowledge by observing and maybe subconsciously mimicking others' body language.
Makes sense, like picking up mannerisms from a good teacher.
Could be part of it. And this whole motor-based knowledge transfer is presented as potentially enhancing communication, even leadership, maybe because it leads to higher engagement from others.
Communicating on more channels than just words.
Right. And visual-motor integration, linking what you see with how you move, is highlighted as key for this embodied cognition, supporting things like spatial skills and learning procedures.
And the source even calls nonverbal expression a parallel language of learning.
Yeah, suggesting it can carry complex meanings, sometimes even without words.
And wrapping that up, the source proposes brainpage classrooms.
Right, as a practical application. Classrooms designed to encourage this active, expressive, gesture-heavy, posture-aware learning style.
Trying to optimize knowledge transfer and cut down on just passive listening.
Exactly. Get the students' bodies involved in the learning process more directly.
That brainpage classroom idea really highlights the contrast the source draws between how teachers often operate and how students traditionally learn.
It's a sharp contrast, isn't it? The source points out that teachers, well, they are using motor knowledge constantly.
How so?
Their speech is a motor act, writing is motor, gesturing is motor. They are actively converting their cognitive understanding into physical motor expressions as they teach.
Okay, yeah, I see that.
But then it notes that students, in a typical lecture setting maybe, are not applying motor science in the same way while they're receiving the information.
They're mostly sitting still, listening, watching.
Right. They might engage those motor systems later, doing homework, practicing problems, basically making their own brain page at home, as the source puts it.
But there's a disconnect in the classroom itself, a missed opportunity.
That seems to be the implication. While the teacher is doing this cognitive to motor conversion and expression, the student might be mainly taking it in cognitively, perhaps not getting that deeper, embodied encoding that could happen with more active motor involvement during the lesson.
Interesting. So circling back then, the core message from this research is really that learning isn't just in our heads. It's deeply, fundamentally embodied.
Yeah. Postures, gestures. They aren't just fluff or social cues. They're presented here as powerful tools that link brain, body, and behavior in this whole dynamic flow of learnography.
Putting motor science right at the center of learning and communication, not off to the side.
Exactly. It really reframes what knowledge even is. Not just abstract data, but something physically woven into our ability to move and express.
So we've journeyed through this idea that postures and gestures, things maybe we don't think about much, are presented here as totally fundamental.
Rooted in brain circuits, tied to emotions, even enabled by our physical evolution.
It definitely changes how you might think about being well-informed or knowledgeable.
For sure. It's not just what facts you can list off, but maybe how your whole physical being participates in knowing and showing that knowledge.
So think about that next time you're really wrestling with a new idea or trying to explain something you know inside out. Notice your own movements, your posture.
Could those actions be more than just echoes of your thoughts?
Yeah. And this research really leaves you wondering, if it's right, what if we could consciously use certain postures and gestures to actually learn better?
Or communicate more effectively? Could intentionally changing how you hold yourself, how you move your hands, genuinely impact your ability to recall something or explain it clearly?
Could standing tall literally help you think clearer?
That's definitely something to mull over until our next deep dive.